20 years on the trail teaches you something most people never figure out about knives. The ones you actually reach for are almost never the ones that look the toughest sitting in a display case. I've carried $3 folders longer than I've carried blades that cost $300. Somewhere in a drawer back at the ranger station, there's a small graveyard of knives that seemed like a great idea for about 2 weeks. And there's exactly one blade that's ridden on my belt for 2 decades straight, through 4 different parks, in weather that ranged from triple-digit heat to a wind chill that froze the lid on my coffee thermos shut. This is the story of what actually earned a place in a park ranger's kit. Not what looked good in a catalog, not what some guy online called tactical enough for the backcountry. A couple of these knives saved me real time on a hard day. One of them, on one specific afternoon, may have mattered a lot more than that. And a couple of them, honestly, I regret buying at all, and I'll tell you exactly why. I started this job at 23, fresh off a seasonal fire crew, thinking a knife was a knife. 20 years and a lot of backcountry miles later, I know better. Most people picture a ranger's day as hiking and answering questions at a trailhead kiosk. That's part of it. The rest of it is trail maintenance with a crew of 5 and 1 chainsaw. It's wildland fire response when the radio traffic picks up in July. It's search and rescue at 2 in the morning with a headlamp and a rope bag. It's wildlife management, collaring, tagging, sometimes recovering an animal that didn't survive a hard winter. And, for a lot of us, it's commissioned law enforcement on top of all of that. Traffic stops on a dirt road, welfare checks on an overdue backpacker, occasionally a confrontation with somebody breaking the law inside the park boundary. None of that is knife work exactly, but almost all of it puts a knife in your hand at some point, usually when you least expect it. A park ranger's knife doesn't have one job, it has about 6. Some weeks it's cutting paracord and opening feed bags. Other weeks it's freeing an animal that's tangled itself in old barbed wire, or helping a biologist collect a field sample, or cutting somebody free after a rollover on a fire road. Nobody designs one knife to do all of that well, so you build a kit the hard way. One bad afternoon at a time, finding out exactly what doesn't work. That's where this story really starts. Not with the best knife I ever owned, with the first one. The first lesson, fine, is underrated. The first blade I ever carried on this job wasn't mine. It was issued. A basic stainless folder, lockback, drop point, the kind of knife a government purchasing office buys by the crate, because it's cheap and reliable enough. And that's the entire story of that knife. It was fine. It cut rope, it cut tape, it opened box after box of trail signage without complaint. It never once impressed me, and it never once let me down. I didn't appreciate how rare that combination actually is until I went out and tried to upgrade it. The second lesson, mechanisms fail exactly when you need them not to. A couple years in, I decided I needed something more serious. I bought a folder with an assisted opening mechanism, aggressive jimping on the spine, the whole aggressive look, the kind of knife that photographs beautifully next to a headlamp and a compass. In my living room, it was flawless. One-handed, instant, satisfying click. Out on a wet trail in October, with a little mud and pine sap worked into the mechanism, that same assisted opener started sticking halfway. Not jammed fully shut, which would almost be better, because then you'd know not to trust it. Half open. At the exact moment I needed both hands free for something else entirely. That's the lesson nobody tells you before you buy a gadget-heavy knife. Every extra mechanism is one more thing that can fail, and the backcountry is remarkably good at finding the one condition that breaks it. I still have that knife. I don't carry it. It lives in the drawer of shame with the rest of the gear I bought before I knew better. So I went back to basics, and that's when the actual personality of this kit started to take shape. Rangers, as a group, trend toward simple, fixed blades over folders when the task is real work. Full tang over anything hollow or partial. Plain edges over serrations, because serrations saw through rope beautifully, but they're miserable to touch up with a stone at a picnic table in the dark, which is exactly where you'll be doing it. The third lesson, bigger and tougher, isn't automatically better. It's a trade, not an upgrade. The next knife earned a real permanent spot and a big full-tang camp knife, a few solid millimeters of steel from tip to butt. This is the knife you can baton straight through a stubborn round of kindling without a second thought about snapping it at the handle. And for a while, it became my answer to almost everything. Splitting firewood on a cold morning when a crew needed heat fast. Clearing a little overgrown brush off a junction that hadn't seen a trail crew in a season. And on the less pleasant side of the job, because there is one, assisting a wildlife biologist with a field necropsy when their own kit wasn't on hand. I'll be careful how I describe that part. There's nothing glamorous about it. It's quiet, responsible science. And it taught me more about edge geometry than any marketing copy ever has. The steel on that knife runs a good 1/4 inch thick at the spine, which sounds like a small detail until you actually feel what it does. That thickness is what lets you batten it through a knotty round of pine without the edge rolling or the tip snapping off. It's the difference between a tool that survives being used as a small axe and one that doesn't. But that same thickness is exactly why it's a terrible instrument for anything delicate. And here's the problem. I found that out the hard way trying to do careful, precise work with it. The same thickness that makes it nearly indestructible makes it clumsy and imprecise for fine cutting. And carrying a knife that size every single day for 10 or 12 trail miles adds up. Ounces become pounds fast when you're on your feet from sunrise past sunset. So the camp knife earned a permanent spot in the kit, but not on my belt every day. It rides in the pack for the days that call for it. That's an important distinction, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit to make it. A tool being excellent at a hard job doesn't mean it belongs with you on the easy days too. The fourth lesson. The knife you use 15 times a day matters more than the one you use once a season. That reassessment changed how I thought about the whole kit. For years, I'd been chasing toughness. Could it patin? Could it pry? Could it survive getting dropped on a rock? Somewhere around year 6 or 7, I realized that was the wrong question. The real question out here is simpler. Will this knife do the specific job in front of me right now with cold hands in the rain without me thinking twice? Because most of what a ranger actually cuts in a day isn't dramatic. It's cordage. It's a sandwich. It's a stuck zipper, a tangled bootlace, a strip of flagging tape marking a hazard tree. That's where a small, lightweight, one-handed folder started earning real respect. Something you can flick open with a thumb while your other hand is on a radio, or steadying a spooked pack animal, or holding pressure on somebody's arm after a fall. Not glamorous, not impressive, laid out on a table. But it's the blade that comes out 15 times a day, every day, for years, without ever once failing at the small, unglamorous job it was asked to do. There's a real lesson buried in that. The knife that gets used the most is rarely the one that looks the most capable. The fifth lesson. A specialist tool is a liability the moment you ask it to be a generalist. Now, I'd be lying if I said this kit has been all wins. A few years into the necropsy work, I picked up a dedicated skinning knife with a replaceable blade system. Thin, razor sharp, the kind of tool a lot of wildlife techs genuinely swear by for careful field cutting. I bought it thinking it could replace half of what I was already carrying. For precise, controlled work, it's excellent. But the first time I leaned on it even slightly, a little twist, a little prying pressure I shouldn't have applied, that thin blade snapped clean at the tang. No drama, no warning, just gone. Miles from the truck, mid-task. That taught me something I now consider close to a rule. A knife built to do one thing perfectly will always fail you the moment you ask it to do something else. That's not a flaw in the knife. That's a flaw in expecting a single blade to be your entire kit. I want to be fair to it, though, because I see this knife get unfairly trashed in gear forums sometimes. For a biologist working out of a truck with a full kit close by, who's only ever asking that blade to do delicate, controlled cutting, it's genuinely one of the best tools available for the job. The failure was mine, not the knife's. I asked a specialist to be a generalist for one careless second, and it told me exactly what it thought of that idea. Now it stays in a dedicated pouch, comes out for exactly one kind of task, and goes right back in the pouch when that task is done. Used correctly, I haven't had a single problem with it since. The sixth lesson: half your gear failures out here aren't cutting problems at all. By the middle of my career, the kit had settled into something closer to a system than a single hero knife. A small, fast folder for the daily grind of tiny cuts. A big fixed blade for the heavy, occasional jobs. A dedicated tool for anything precise and biological, and riding on the belt at all times, something that isn't a knife at all. A multi-tool. I went through 2 or 3 before settling on one, because a real chunk of the actual emergencies out here aren't cutting problems. They're a loose bolt on a trail sign, a pack buckle that needs recrimping in the field, a fishhook that needs to come out of somebody's palm at the lake, which calls for pliers, not an edge. A knife handles half the job this work throws at you. It was never built to handle the other half, and pretending otherwise is how you end up standing there with the wrong tool in your hand for the actual problem in front of you. The seventh lesson, and the one that actually mattered. And that finally brings me to the one knife that's never left my belt since the year I bought it. It's about as plain as a knife gets. A Scandinavian pattern fixed blade, high carbon steel. A simple Scandi grind. A handle you can hold with wet, cold hands and never lose your grip on. It cost less than a tank of gas. No gimmicks. No glass breaker molded into the handle. No seatbelt hook. No jimping. And it is, without a doubt, the single most useful knife I have ever owned. It carves a feather stick for a fire in under a minute. It handles careful work cleanly. It's thin enough for precision and tough enough that I've bottomed it through wood more times than I can count without a single chip in that edge. And it sharpens easily on a flat stone at a picnic table, headlamp in your teeth. Again, exactly where you'll be sharpening it at the end of a long day, not in a climate-controlled kitchen. There's one afternoon with this knife I still think about, and it's the reason it's never come off my belt since. We had a vehicle go off a fire road during a storm, rain coming down sideways, visibility maybe 30 feet, rolled once, came to rest on its side in a drainage ditch. By the time our crew got down there, the driver was pinned by a seatbelt that had jammed hard under load. The buckle wouldn't release, no matter how hard anyone pulled on it. Every second mattered, and I remember thinking clearly in that moment that I did not reach for the big camp knife in my pack, and I did not reach for the flashy folder that used to live on my belt. I reached for that plain little blade because it was already in my hand before I'd even consciously decided to grab it. One clean pull through the webbing, and the pressure was gone. We got the driver out, got them stabilized, got them handed off to the ambulance crew at the trailhead. It wasn't until I was cleaning gear back at the truck an hour later, hands still not quite steady, that I actually looked down at that knife. No chip in the edge, no roll. It didn't even need resharpening. It had just done exactly what it was supposed to do without asking to be noticed for it. That's not a story about a knife surviving a torture test in a video. That's a story about a knife earning enough trust across enough ordinary, unremarkable days that it became the automatic choice, the one time it actually mattered. That's a different kind of proof than anything you'll find on a spec sheet. So where does that leave the kit after 20 years? The expensive, tactical-looking blade mostly sits in a drawer. The specialist tool does its one job beautifully and nothing else, and I respect it enough now to only ever ask that one thing of it. The big camp knife earns its keep on the heavy days and stays in the pack the rest of the time. The multi-tool handles the half of the job that was never a cutting problem to begin with. And the simple, honest, unglamorous steel, cheap, plain, easy to sharpen, easy to trust, is what actually rides on the belt every single day, doing the small jobs nobody films and being ready for the one job nobody plans for. That's not a knock on good engineering. Some of these knives are genuinely well made, and I'd recommend a few of them without hesitation to the right person for the right job. If you're doing controlled, precise field work out of a vehicle with backup gear nearby, that specialist skinning knife is hard to beat. If you're building a base camp and splitting wood for a week, the big fixed blade earns every ounce it weighs. If you just need something dependable in a pocket for everyday tasks around a work site, that first issued folder, boring as it is, will outlast almost anything flashier. None of that makes those knives wrong. It just means none of them are the one knife you build a whole kit around. It's a reminder that well-made and right for the job in front of you are two completely different questions. Out here, the wilderness only ever asks you the second one. And that's the Ranger rule I'd leave you with. Don't buy the knife that looks like it belongs in a war movie. Buy the knife that will still open, without hesitation, in cold, wet hands after 12 hours on your feet. At the exact moment, you're not thinking about the knife at all. You're only thinking about the job. That's the only test that's ever actually mattered out here. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you on the next one.